June 22, 1942, southern sector of the Eastern Front. 2:47 a.m. Major Ernst Richter adjusted his glasses as he examined the phosphorescent green screen of the Würzburg radar. The bright spots danced across the circular surface, revealing every Soviet bomber that dared to cross the 80-kilometer perimeter. German technology, he murmured with satisfaction as he lit his third cigarette that frigid morning. Outside, the familiar hum of Junkers Umo engines filled the air. The F-110 night fighters took off in perfect formation, guided by radar operators who turned the darkness into a tactical advantage. Herr Major, the young operator Helmut Kraus, pointed to the pristine screen. Clear sky, not a Soviet fly tonight. Richter gave a dry laugh. Ever since the Freya and Würzburg radars were installed along the defense line, Soviet bombers had become easy prey. Tupolev, Ilyushin, Petliakov, they all appeared on the screen like shooting stars about to die. The Russians still fly wooden biplanes from World War I, the Major scoffed, crushing out his cigarette butt. While we've mastered the electromagnetic spectrum, it's like fighting cavemen with spears. At that very moment, 12 kilometers away, flying just 100 meters above the ground, a plywood and canvas Po-2 biplane glided silently through the darkness. Its 5-cylinder engine barely overshadowed the sound of the wind. In the open cockpit, Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova held the control stick with a steady hand, despite the 20-degree cold biting through her leather gloves. Under the wings, 2 50-kilo bombs waited for the right moment. The Würzburg radar continued to show clear skies. What Major Richter didn't know was that on that freezing June night, he was witnessing the beginning of his own nightmare, a nightmare made of wood, fabric, and Soviet courage that would transform night terrors into an art form. The Polikarpov Po-2 was born not as a weapon, but as an insult to progress. In 1927, when the aeronautical world was celebrating metal monoplanes and ever more powerful engines, Nikolai Polikarpov received a seemingly ridiculous order from the Soviet Aviation Commissariat to design a trainer so simple that any peasant could fly it, so cheap that the Soviet Union could build thousands. Wood, Polikarpov told his engineers at the Moscow design office, Siberian pine timber, canvas, and wire. Chief engineer Dmitry Tomashevich nearly choked on his tea. Nikolai Nikolaevich, the Americans are testing aluminum fuselages, the Germans are experimenting with magnesium alloys, and we're going to build with wood? Exactly, Polikarpov replied, unfolding the first sketches. A biplane with a Shvetsov M11 engine of only 100 horsepower. Top speed, 150 kilometers per hour. The U-2 prototype, as it was initially called, was a walking contradiction. While the world raced toward the future, the Soviet Union seemed to be retreating to the past. During the first tests in 1928, veteran pilots refused to fly what they called the flying coffin. Test pilot Boris Buchholz recorded in his diary, January 7, 1928, first flight of the U-2. The machine shakes like a leaf, the engine coughs like a consumptive, cruising speed less than that of an express train. If this is the future of Soviet aviation, God help us. The technical specifications were a joke among aeronautical circles. Frame, pine stringers, birch plywood ribs, covering, linen fabric doped with varnish. Empty weight, 635 kilograms. Stall speed, 40 km/h. Operational ceiling, 3,000 meters. Autonomy, 400 kilometers. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky visited the factory in Leningrad and openly declared, "This aircraft is a disgrace to modern aviation. While we build wooden toys, the fascists build steel bombers." But Polikarpov had a different vision. During a stormy meeting in the Kremlin, he defended his project with prophetic words. "Comrades, you see weakness where there is adaptability. You see primitivism where there is genius. This plane can land in any potato field, be repaired by any tractor mechanic, and fly in conditions that would bring down a modern fighter jet." Stalin, smoking his pipe, asked dryly, "And how will this contraption help us when the Germans come?" Polikarpov hesitated, then replied, "Comrade Stalin, have you ever tried to kill a mosquito with a cannon?" Between 1928 and 1941, more than 13,000 Po-2s were produced. Factories in Leningrad, Kazan, and Moscow churned out dozens daily. The aircraft became the backbone of the Soviet training program. Every pilot in the Soviet Air Force, VVS, learned to fly a Po-2. Marina Raskova, the legendary Soviet aviator, wrote in her memoirs, "The Po-2 taught you humility. No radio, no sophisticated instruments, just you, the wind, and an engine that sounded more like a sewing machine. If you could master a Po-2 in the Russian winter, You could fly anything. When Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, the Luftwaffe destroyed 200 Soviet aircraft on the first day. Modern fighters, heavy bombers, all were turned into flaming scrap. But in the makeshift hangars, the forests, the camouflaged barns, thousands of Po-2s remained intact, too insignificant to merit German bombs, too primitive to be considered a threat. The Soviet High Command, in desperation, issued Order 0099, mobilize all available air assets, including training aircraft for combat operations. Major General Alexander Novikov protested, "Sending Po-2s against Messerschmitts is murder." Stalin replied with characteristic coldness, "Then transform them into something else. War is adaptation, General." No one imagined that this apparent failure of aeronautical design carried the seeds not only of victory, but of a revolution in night-air warfare that would terrorize the Wehrmacht until the end of the conflict. July 15, 1941, Smolensk Front. The Po-2's first raid as a bomber was a memorable disaster. Lieutenant Viktor Talanov led 6 Po-2s loaded with 25-kilogram homemade bombs on a daylight mission against a German panzer column. The official report, document VVS 77141, preserved in the Moscow military archives, records the result with bureaucratic brutality. Losses: 5 aircraft destroyed, 1 severely damaged. Enemy casualties: none confirmed. Flight commander's observation: Po-2s fly like loaded bricks. Insufficient speed to escape anti-aircraft fire. Operating altitude within heavy machine gun range. Recommend immediate suspension of daylight operations. German pilot Oberleutnant Friedrich Beck of JG 51 recorded the encounter in his diary. July 17, 1941. Today was almost comical. We encountered 6 Russian biplanes trying to bomb our column. They looked like something out of a museum. My Bf 109 outpaced them, even with flaps fully extended. It was like shooting ducks in a pond. I shot down 2 in a single pass. The Russians must have been really desperate. German propaganda radio had a field day. Joseph Goebbels personally authorized a special broadcast mocking Bolshevik despair. Soldiers of the Reich, the Soviets now send toy planes against our invincible Luftwaffe, wooden biplanes that our great-grandfathers would fly in the Great War. This is not courage, it is the suicidal madness of a dying regime. At Soviet bases, morale plummeted. Pilots refused to fly Po-2 missions. A mutiny nearly broke out in the 588th Regiment when the order came to convert the entire unit to a Po-2 squadron. Colonel Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the regiment commander, faced his furious pilots. "You want us to commit suicide?" shouted Lieutenant Raisa Aronova. "These flying coffins can barely lift 2 bombs." Bershanskaya, a veteran with nerves of steel, calmly replied, "What if we only flew at night?" Silence filled the room. "At night," she continued, "no moon at low altitude. The German fighters can't see us. The radars will detect us anyway," interrupted navigator Irina Sebrova. "Really?" Bershanskaya smiled enigmatically. "Have you ever seen radar detect a tree?" The first night mission was scheduled for August 8, 1941. 8 Po-2s from the 588th Regiment, now composed entirely of female pilots, took off under cover of darkness. The outcome was marginally better. Only 1 Po-2 lost, a German fuel depot damaged. The German report captured after the war mentioned only minimal night air activity, possible Russian reconnaissance aircraft, no significant threat. Oberst Hans Rudel, the famous Stuka ace, sarcastically commented in a letter to his wife, "The Russians are now attacking us with planes that make less noise than a motorcycle. It's pathetic. Last night our anti-aircraft artillery spent more ammunition trying to hit those mosquitoes than they did all last week. It's like using a hammer to kill a fly." But there was something strange about the German reports, something that initially went unnoticed at Berlin headquarters. Radar operators consistently reported no air activity detected on the same nights that sentries reported aircraft engine over our positions. Radar expert Hauptmann Ernst Müller was sent to investigate the discrepancy. His initial conclusion was dismissive, probably equipment defects due to the extreme cold. The radars work perfectly. If there were planes, we would see them. He was right about how radar works, and completely wrong about everything else. September 23, 1941. Secret air base near Moscow. Professor Leonid Kulik, a physicist at the Lebedev Institute, arrived at the 588th Regiment's base carrying a black briefcase and an enigmatic smile. Personally summoned by Stalin, he had a mission: to understand why Po-2s occasionally disappeared from German radar. "Show me one of your planes," he asked Major Bershanskaya. As he examined the Po-2, Kulik began to laugh. His laughter grew into a hysterical guffaw. "Professor, is everything okay?" Bershanskaya asked worriedly. "Perfect," Kulik exclaimed. pulling measuring instruments from his briefcase. Absolutely perfect, don't you understand? This plane is invisible. He spent the next 3 hours making measurements, calculations, and testing portable radio equipment. Then he called an emergency meeting. Comrades, radar works by emitting electromagnetic waves that bounce off metal objects. Metal reflects radio waves like a mirror reflects light. But wood, plywood covered with doped fabric, absorbs most of the energy or scatters it in random directions. Navigator Natalia Meklin raised her hand. But the engine is metal. Yes, Kulik was almost dancing with excitement. A small 5-cylinder engine. The radar signature is smaller than that of a car. And how high do you fly? Entre 50 e 500 metros, respondeu a piloto Yevgenia Zigulenko. Below the radar horizon line, the beam passes over you. And the speed? Are you flying at 120 kilometers per hour? When we're lucky, someone joked. That's slower than the stall speed of a German night fighter. They can't slow down enough to target you without crashing. It's genius. You've accidentally created the first stealth bomber in history. From that night on, everything changed. New tactics were developed. The Po-2s would fly at minimum altitude, exploiting the terrain's contours. 3 kilometers from the target, the engine would be shut down. The plane would glide in absolute silence, with only the whisper of the wind on the wire structures betraying its presence. Like witches on broomsticks, muttered a German sentry, seconds before a 50-kilogram bomb blew up his observation post. Nachthexen, witches of the night. The name stuck. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova developed a revolutionary technique, approaching the target with the engine idling, almost stopping in midair, then diving with the engine off, restarting only after dropping the bombs and escaping close to the ground. It's like a dance, she explained to the new girls. The Po-2 doesn't fight the air, it floats in it. Use it. By October 1941, the results began to show. Ammunition dumps mysteriously exploding. Command posts destroyed without warning. Luftwaffe airfields in flames. Hauptmann Otto Fuchs, commander of an anti-aircraft battery, wrote in frustration. October 15, 1941, third consecutive night of attacks. Radar shows nothing. Searchlights can't find them. When we finally hear the engine, it's too late. They appear out of nowhere like ghosts. My men are shooting at shadows, but the real psychological turning point came on October 23, 1941. General Oberst Wolfram von Richthofen, cousin of the legendary Red Baron and commander of the 8th Fliegerkorps, was inspecting a forward airfield when the Po-2s attacked. 3 biplanes emerged from the darkness, engines idling, gliding like birds of prey. The first bomb destroyed 2 Ju-87 Stukas. The second set the fuel depot ablaze. The third fell less than 50 meters from the command bunker where Richthofen was sheltering. When he emerged, covered in dust and furious, he bellowed, "How is this possible? Where were the radars, the night fighters?" "Herr General," stammered the major in charge of air defense, "the radars didn't detect anything. They were just wooden biplanes." Richthofen was silent for a long moment. Then, in an icy voice, "I want every searchlight, every anti-aircraft gun, every night fighter concentrated on those wooden biplanes. Do you understand?" The major nodded, but they both knew the unspoken truth. They had created the perfect defenses against modern bombers, but they were powerless against flying relics that defied all military logic. December 1941 to May 1942, Eastern Front. The Russian winter struck like a hammer, but for the night witches, the freezing cold was an ally. The German fighters' engines froze, their radars malfunctioned, but the Po-2's simple M11 engines, designed for the Russian climate, purred faithfully at 40 degrees. Terror began to spread methodically through the German lines. Gefreiter Heinrich Zimmermann wrote to his mother in Hamburg, December 15, 1941. "Dear Mother, the nights here are hell, not because of the heavy bombers we can hear coming, but because of the damned Russian mosquito planes. They come every night, sometimes every hour. We can't sleep. The sound, first a distant engine hum, then total silence, then the whistle of falling bombs. Yesterday Fritz went crazy. He started shooting in the air, screaming about witches. They had to tie him up. The numbers were staggering. In January 1942, the 588th Regiment alone flew 1,347 night sorties. Each Po-2 carried just 2 50-kilo bombs, sometimes 4 25-kilo bombs. Individually, minimal damage. Collectively, psychological devastation. About Oberst Hermann Plocker to Estado Mayor de Luftwaffe calculo. If each Po-2 drops 100 kilos of bombs, and we have 50 attacks per night, that's 5 tons of explosives. Not much compared to a Heinkel 111 attack, but the Heinkels attack once. These demons attack all night, every night, nobody sleeps. Troop efficiency drops by 30%. It's psychological warfare in its purest form. The Night Witches unleashed a symphony of terror. 3 or 4 Po-2s circled the target. One dived with its engine off while the others kept theirs running, confusing the direction of the sound. When the defenses focused on the noise, the silent plane attacked. The cadence was hypnotic, reported Major Wilhelm Jonen, a night fighter ace. Rum, 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 silence, and boom, rum, 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 silence, a boom, 8-10 times a night, every night. My pilots were exhausted before they even took off. In February 1942, the Luftwaffe attempted to counterattack. Entire squadrons of Bf-110 and Ju-88 night fighters were assigned to Operation Insektentöten, kill the insects. The result was humiliating. Hauptmann Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, who would become the greatest German night ace, described his first attempt. I visually detected a Po-2 in the moonlight. I dove to intercept. At 300 km/h, I overshot the target before I could fire. I slowed to 200 km/h on the second pass, still too fast. On the third attempt, at 150 km/h, my Bf-110 stalled and I nearly crashed. The Po-2 simply turned sharply and disappeared into the darkness. It's like an elephant trying to chase a mosquito. Captured German statistics show the escalation. December 1941, 423. Po-2 attacks recorded January 1942, 1,189 attacks February 1942, 2,241 attacks March 1942, 3,877 attacks April 1942, 5,114 attacks. But the real terror was in the details. The witches began adding whistles and sirens to their bombs. The high-pitched sound as they fell was unbearable. Veteran soldiers, who had faced heavy artillery without flinching, trembled at the distant hum of an M11 engine. General Major Gotthard Heinrici wrote in his diary, March 15, 1942, the troops call them Nähmaschinen, sewing machines, for the sound of their engines. But the name doesn't capture the dread. Yesterday, I found a veteran Unteroffizier from France and Poland crying in his trench. They come every night, he repeated. Every night without fail, like clockwork. We can't stop them. The Wehrmacht tried everything. Suspended cable networks, balloon barrages, anti-aircraft fire screens. Nothing worked consistently. The Po-2s flew too low for the cables, too slow for the firing patterns, too invisible for accurate aiming. Major Irina Sibrova, a veteran navigator, explained after the war, we knew every hill, every river, every wood. We flew so low we could see the expressions on the faces of German sentries in the light of their campfires. Once I passed so close to a watchtower that the soldier tried to shoot me with his rifle, missing by meters. I saw the terror in his eyes. In that moment I understood. We weren't just dropping bombs, we were sowing fear. By May 1942, the cumulative impact was undeniable. General Franz Halder, chief of the German Army General Staff, wrote, the night raids by Russian light bombers, while causing limited material damage, are having a disproportionate effect on troop morale. Exhausted soldiers make mistakes. Angry officers make rash decisions. It's a form of torture we hadn't anticipated. The distinctive sound of the M11 engine, sewing machine to the Germans, became the soundtrack to night terrors on the Eastern Front. Of the 261 German night fighters lost between December 1941 and May 1942, 47 were shot down while attempting to intercept Po-2s, many crashing into the ground during extreme low-altitude maneuvers. The Po-2 transcended its existence as a mere war machine. It became a symbol of a combat philosophy that defied all established conventions. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, observing a Po-2 demonstration in June 1942, made a remark that would go down in military history. The Germans built a war of steel and precision. We responded with wood and courage. They trusted in technology. We trusted in the human spirit. This little wooden plane is proof that war is not just about material superiority, but about the will to adapt, survive, and win. The Po-2 doctrine represented a complete inversion of the principles of modern warfare. While every nation raced toward faster, more heavily armed, more sophisticated aircraft, the Po-2 thrived by being the exact opposite. Professor Viktor Kulikov of the Moscow Institute for Strategic Studies wrote in his post-war analysis, the Po-2 demonstrated the principle of inverse asymmetry. When the enemy builds its defenses for sophisticated threats, extreme simplicity becomes a weapon. The Germans had created a perfect air defense network for the 20th century. The Po-2 attacked them with 19th century technology, rendering their defenses not only useless, but counterproductive. The philosophical implications were profound. Colonel General Alexander Novikov, commander of the VVS, articulated at a staff conference, the West has always seen progress as linear, each generation of technology superior to the last. The Po-2 proves that progress can be circular. Sometimes the answer to the future lies in the past. Planned simplicity can defeat complexity. The Germans, initially dismissive, were forced to acknowledge this truth. General der Flieger Wolfram von Richthofen wrote in his report to Berlin, "We fatally underestimated the value of simplicity. We built an air defense system that is an engineering marvel. Radar, coordinated communications, guided interceptors. The Russians responded with an aircraft that negates every one of these advantages simply because it is too primitive for our systems to detect or engage effectively." But there was an even deeper dimension. The Po-2 wasn't just about technology. It was about the democratization of aerial warfare. Marina Raskova, the legendary aviator who formed the women's regiments, explained, "A Messerschmitt requires years of training, elite pilots, specialized mechanics, high-octane fuel, concrete runways. A Po-2, anyone with 100 hours of flight time can fly it. Any tractor mechanic can fix it. It can use automobile fuel. It can land in a plowed field. It's the people's aviation." This philosophy had monumental strategic consequences. While Germany could produce hundreds of sophisticated fighters, the Soviet Union produced over 40,000 Po-2s during the war. While the loss of a Bf-109 pilot meant years of wasted training, Po-2 pilots could be trained in weeks. Major Hans Rudel, the famous Stuka ace, admitted in his memoirs, "We destroyed 1,000 Po-2s and 2,000 appeared. It was like the mythological Hydra." But the real terror wasn't the numbers, it was the mentality. Every Russian peasant could become a pilot. Every carpenter could build a Po-2. We were fighting not an air force, but an entire nation. The psychological and cultural impact was equally profound. The night witches, women piloting obsolete biplanes, destroyed the myth of Nazi technological and racial superiority. Nadezhda Popova, with her 852 combat missions, articulated, "Every time a Po-2 piloted by a Soviet woman destroyed a target defended by superior German technology, it was a living refutation of Nazi ideology. We weren't just soldiers, we were walking proof that their world of racial and technological hierarchies was a lie." British military historian John Keegan later observed, "The Po-2 represents perhaps the purest example in military history of how apparent weakness can be transformed into strength, how limitation can become freedom, how the obsolete can become revolutionary. It is a lesson that transcends war. It is a meditation on the nature of power itself."